Hello and welcome to Instant Insights, Global Data's strategic intelligence podcast. At Global Data Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Stu Robarts, and today we're exploring the sweeping tariffs agenda that has been proposed by the Trump administration 2.0 in the US. Taking aim at major trading partners and allies, as well as rivals like China, it's the most radical program of tariffs in modern US history. How much of what has been proposed will be enacted, however, remains to be seen. Delays to levies on goods from Mexico and Canada have already been announced, and the picture is evolving on a daily, even hourly basis. I spoke with Marco Forgione, Director General of the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade, and William Bain, Head of Trade Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce. With so much mixed messaging and wide-ranging opinion about Trump's motivations for such a radical programme, I began by asking Forgione what he thought the reasoning was.
So there's been a lot of activity over the past couple of weeks, which was kind of precursor before the inauguration by the announcements that tariffs were President Trump's favourite word and were going to be used. And I think it was really important is that we don't look at the tariffs just as a trade issue. These are geoeconomic and geopolitical tools that are being deployed. So that the aim of imposing tariffs is to do more than just redress the perceived inequity of the current global trading system. This is very much about leveraging political power and economic power to deliver against that America First agenda.
Bain, too, sees the geopolitical leverage being exerted as a means of effecting change domestically.
Well, it's true that last time around, there was perhaps a more distinctly economic purpose to the tariffs. This time, there's a range of factors here. Geopolitics is one of them. Issues around defense and security are involved in it as well. But I think there's also a sort of clearer purpose one can discern from the administration's policy this time, which is that they want to target markets which have, as they would judge it, a high surplus in trading goods with the United States. And so that's why we've seen early action being taken in respect of Canada, Mexico on the radar, the European Union being mentioned very strongly. So I think it's more about a sort of wider view about the American foreign policy, its defense and security interests, and seeing the sort of the economic case and benefit this time, as the administration views it, of implementing the tariffs. So them not just being used as a lever for further negotiations, but them actually making a sort of benefit of this in terms of onshoring US production, changing US supply chains and consumer habits, and potentially as an important source of revenue to fund tax cuts within the internal US economy. So I think the ambition of what's being done this time and the purposes underpinning it seem to be far greater than that from the first Trump administration.
While some countries that Trump has already threatened with tariffs have fallen into line, Bain is clear that such high-stakes poker puts the global economy at risk.
One only needs to look at the forecasts from the World Trade Organization of a reduction in global trade if we end up with across-the-board tariffs. You look at work, for example, from the Sussex University trade team, who've said that if we ended up with tariffs on goods here in the UK, you'd be looking at a 2.5% reduction overall in UK exports to the US. So more tariffs means less trade, means higher prices, means lower consumer demand. And there are not any economists that we see on this side of the Atlantic who seem to be saying that you can bring in these tariffs and see global trade increase. So global trade is likely to go into reverse if this happens. A protracted and expanding trade war, something we'd all want to avoid, but if it happens, we're simply going to see less cross-border trade. and that will have a significant impact on global growth.
Despite this potential for global trade upheaval, and some suggestions that Trump's tariffs could do more harm than good domestically, Forgione notes that opinion is by no means universal on this.
So if you look at tariffs in isolation, there is a view that what tends to happen is neither side wins, and you drive up inflation, and you just create economic and social problems, loss of employment as a result of the lack of trade. But if you look at the comprehensive package that the president is implementing, in part through tariffs, in part through fiscal policy, the announcement that businesses investing in the US will, see their taxes reduced, corporation tax will reduce, the intention to remove income tax from the federal income tax from the general population. I think the markets show themselves that there is uncertainty, but a belief that possibly this could be effective for the US economy. That perceived straight line between you impose tariffs and therefore you see inflation and loss of jobs within your domestic market isn't the same when you look at the whole package of what the administration is looking to impose. It does, however, have implications for everybody else and the rest of the global economy and the intentions of the US geopolitically, particularly with regards to China, and the very clear attempt to force trading partners with the US to de-China their supply chain.
Indeed, he points to some signs that the approach is already paying dividends.
Well, we're starting to see an impact from this plan of action already. We've seen some of the world's largest manufacturers all say that they intend to prioritize investment in the US, whether that's Stellantis, the auto manufacturer, or Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy saying that they're going to bring more production into the US, whether that's Shell saying they're going to increase their investment in the US, or some of Southeast Asia's largest companies, all saying that now their priority is to grow production capability in the US. I think there's a number of other areas that the president is looking to have an influence. We've seen, obviously, the latest news with regards to China and Mexico. That's more to do with border security and trying to stop the flow of illegal immigrants and drugs across the border. There's a key target, which is to address the perceived unfair practices of China in the global supply chain, starting with the influence of the Belt and Road Initiative. And we've seen the Panama president announce that they are withdrawing from Belt and Road in the last 24 hours. We saw Colombia say that they would not be bullied, and then within 24 hours recant and do what the US president wants. Mexico have reached an agreement to delay the implementation of tariffs. So if we take a step back and look at what is the president trying to achieve, it's a multi-fronted campaign, and it's clearly having an impact even within the last couple of weeks.
The imposition of tariffs naturally has a diversionary effect, but Bain and Forgione are both of a mind that the extent of Trump's proposed tariffs has the potential to reshape global trade dramatically.
Well, of course, there could be the likelihood of trade diversion. So goods that would have gone to the United States but for the tariffs might start to enter into other markets. So, it'll be very interesting to see the sort of China export patterns on things like clothing and textiles and footwear, over the next few months. So there could be issues around diversion of trade into other markets. And of course, if there is elements where you have a surge in demand, which is deemed as unfair in terms of the World Trade Organization rules, then there are various processes that the Trade Remedies Authority here, for example, could use if there were such sort of surge in imports that was going to impede or compete unfairly with domestic production. So Government and Trade Remedies Authority will have to be very watchful about any sort of diversion of trade from the US into the UK. The other things in terms of, perhaps some areas where the UK could look to export a bit more, particularly if it's not being tariffed, are in the areas where, China, for example, is going to be hit hard by the 10% tariff. So there could be opportunities in automotive, there could be opportunities in clothing, textiles, footwear, for further UK exports to the US. And indeed, if you look at the Sussex University work on this, they said that if you had an across-the-board 10% tariff, of course, sectors like pharmaceuticals and chemicals and mined goods and automotive would be hurt badly. But potentially for clothing, textiles, and footwear, because of these trade diversionary effects, there could be a very modest opportunity to do more trade with the US as a result of extensive across-the-board tariffs.
If tariffs are imposed, if product that was due to go into the US market from Mexico, Canada, or wherever is now priced out of that marketplace, we're going to have a global supply of product that is looking for a marketplace, which could have a deflationary impact, would have an impact on nations' domestic capabilities to produce those products, and will even further destabilize the already fractured global supply chain, integrated supply chains. And if we look specifically with regards to the EU, which seems to be target number 4 on the list of the administration behind Mexico, Canada, and China, I think there is potential for very significant supply disruption. And although the president has said that he has issues with the UK, but it's not a priority, I think the UK could certainly be impacted by any action taken by the US against the EU because of our integrated supply chain with the EU, and also because, of course, of the special status of Northern Ireland and the potential implications of any action by US against the EU that may have an impact on Northern Ireland, because, of course, it is unique in the world and sitting in 2 customs unions.
Elaborating on this, Forgione suggests that the EU can likely expect sustained pressure from Trump in the long term, creating opportunities for others, not least the UK.
So with regards to the EU, I mean, President Trump has been very clear. His priorities are automotive, agriculture, and energy. Those are the 3 key areas that he feels the EU needs to take action to give greater access to the US into the EU marketplace. But this is just the opening salvo. I think that there are other areas, and there are other areas that the president would want to look at, with the digital services tax potential, as well as access to the health service and pharma into both the UK and EU markets. So I think that there are a range of areas whereby there could be challenges. Our key trade with the US is primarily services, so outside the scope of tariffs, but automotive, aerospace are key industries and sectors, as well as food and drink, that we access into the US, which is both a challenge because it would undoubtedly come under scope of EU focused sanctions, tariffs, but also gives us an opportunity, because if those sectors are being impacted with the trade from Canada and Mexico, there's an opportunity for those businesses in the UK to grow their marketplace in the US now.
And to capitalise on this position?
I think the key thing is for UK businesses to make sure they are prepared to both take advantage of the opportunities, and there are many opportunities to trade into the US currently, exploring how they make sure they are complying with the import rules and regulations, the customs rules and regulations for the US, and keep themselves alert and up to date with the rapidly changing regulatory and tariff landscape with the trade in the US. But the reality is, I think we're going to see now the US economy go through a really transformational period of time. And that is a huge opportunity for UK businesses. If we're going to engender that growth agenda that the government is looking to achieve, I think there is an opportunity for the UK specifically to not only address the friction that currently exists with trade to the EU, but to exploit a multitude of opportunities to grow market with the US. These two are not exclusive. It's not binary, one or the other. I think there's a slim but credible landing patch whereby the UK can address current friction with the EU and build a much closer, bigger trading relationship with the US.
Bain too believes there are potential opportunities for the UK.
Well, there is no trade dispute between the UK and the US. The US has a modest surplus in terms of trade in goods with the UK. So we're not in the first tranche of countries that are being looked at. We would say as a result, there would be no case for tariffs on UK goods. So we're hopeful that the distinct position that the UK has in terms of its US trade will be recognised in the decisions that are made. In terms of services, our trade is burgeoning there. We're doing over £110 billion worth of services exports a year to the US market. So no need for any restrictions on that whatsoever. That helps make both of our countries prosperous. So we're hopeful that the particular nature of UK-US trade means that there won't be tariffs. We should have confidence that we can get to a position that keeps tariffs off. Clearly we'll wait and see. We're in a moving position, lots of moving parts, but certainly we're not in the eye of the storm at this point. And we would urge both governments to take pragmatic decisions, recognize the depth of our trade and investment relationship, and the best way to see that grow is to avoid the imposition of tariffs. In terms of trade discussions with the US, it doesn't seem likely that there could be a full free trade agreement. We've been through this position twice already, once when we were in the EU and once after we've finished our EU membership. There are obvious, very strong obstacles why there would be not much prospect of an FTA at this point. You look at the food rules and food standards. That is one at the very least. But there are agreements that the UK and the US could reach. Not in the way of a full FTA, but in the way of perhaps some sectoral agreements, looking at what we can do in digital trade and customs and trade facilitation. These are all areas where, we would have a common interest in making the cost of doing trade across the Atlantic cheaper and quicker. And so, that plus keeping tariffs off, seems to be the good basis for some kind of arrangement with the US, but probably short of a full free trade agreement.
Despite this, he notes that the unpredictability of the situation means that the UK remains at risk.
Well, it's likely that a whole range of industries in the UK would be hurt by tariffs, even if they're applied to our neighbours and key other trading partners, and even not to ourselves. But if they were eventually to be applied to the UK in a few weeks or months' time, then areas like pharmaceuticals would be hurt badly, automotive, mined goods, electronics, industrial exports, certain food and drink products could be in line of fire as well. So there's very few sectors that would see any sort of benefit from this. Depending on what kind of trade diversion occurs, possibly clothing, textiles, and footwear could see some extra trading opportunities into the US market. But for most economic sectors, in terms of traded goods, tariffs would be lose-lose. There are no gains to be made out of this. More tariffs means reduced consumer demand, means reduced global growth, means reduced ability to sell your exports overseas. So there are no winners from this game.
Finally, it's Bain's position that Trump has precipitated wholesale change in the global trade landscape, and that businesses and consumers should not expect this to be a fleeting bout of geopolitical plate shifting.
Well, clearly we're into a different global era when it comes to tariffs. We've had a prolonged period where, it was all about liberalizing tariffs, getting them down to zero, eliminating them. We've now got the return of tariffs, and we're likely to face this kind of climate for the foreseeable future.
That's all we've got time for today. Thanks to our guests Marco Forgione and William Bain, and thanks to you for listening. Until next time, this has been Instant Insights.